Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and Television Office. Our guest tonight is a legend. He has worked on some of the greatest films of all time, including Jaws, Close Encounters, Sleeping Beauty, Forbidden Planet. I want to welcome a phenomenal production designer, director, Joe Alves. Welcome to Double Feature.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Joe, you were born and raised in California.
Right.
And you studied art.
Yes, I did.
And I know somehow you made your way from art school, architecture, to Walt Disney Studios. How did that all happen?
Well, okay, briefly, yes, I was born in California. My parents were from Portugal, and I went to school. I was interested in art and music, but I thought maybe I should study something a little bit more substantial, like architecture. We had an architect in the family, my cousin. But I was interested in movies, and so I thought maybe architecture, but drama. So I also was a drama minor. After the first year, I decided to head to Hollywood and hopefully get into the movie business. I found an incredible school by luck called Chenard Art Institute, and because they primarily had a curriculum that focused on production designing. So I did that, and then after the first year, I needed a summer job, or I had to go back to...
How old were you, like 19, 20?
Yes, you know, I graduated high school all through my senior year. I was 16, so I turned 17 that summer. And then, so my first year I was 17, so when I went to my second year, I was 18. So now this summer, I just turned 19. I needed a summer job. A friend of mine said, you know, my wife's father works at Disney. And I thought, okay, maybe Andy Ingman, maybe I can get a job sweeping up or something. And he said, oh, you know my daughter? I said, yes, somewhat, you know, I do. He said, bring it in your portfolio. I said, okay, I don't think I'm quite ready yet, you know. He said, no, bring it in. So he looked at the portfolio and he said, we're too late for the training program. You know, they have a training program at Disney, like in the all the studio system there, you start off as a junior something, whether it's photography,
ink and paint.
Yeah. So he said, and then you go, you know, to a breakdown artist, and after years an assistant and so forth. He said, I have an available place in special effects. They do fire and water and all that sort of stuff. So I said, okay. So they put me in this room with this woman, Margaret, and I said, very nice lady. I said, what do I do? She said, you flip the pages and draw in between. I said, oh, that seems easy enough. So I was working with her, and she was working, assisting. So she was like a breakdown artist. She was working for an assistant, Dwight Carlisle, who was in his 60s, and he was working for Josh Metter. Now, Josh Metter was the king of effects. He did the Night on Bald Mountain, in Fantasia. He did the fire in Bambi, and Josh was a great artist too. So I'm working for her, and she's working for Carl. And after a few weeks, she says, "Oh, I have to leave. I have to leave the studio for some reason." Blah blah blah. So she left it, and I started working directly for Carl. And so now they have this thing. I'm not flipping these little pages. They have a contract with MGM as doing a movie called Forbidden Planet to animate this thing called the id.
The id.
Now, they didn't want it ink and paint. They wanted to get it sort of where they had the shadowing and shade, so you didn't have an ink and paint line.
And for those who don't know, so this is a film with Walter Pidgeon, Leslie Nielsen. It's a sci-fi.
Anne Francis.
And Robbie the Robot.
Right.
And it was so groundbreaking.
Yeah. But so they wanted to do this effect, and at that time, you had the three-color system. So they wanted to do a red and blue id. So we did 2 drawings and shaded everything. So they would photograph one in red and one in blue and overlay them. So you didn't get that cartoon line. So I'm working for Dwight Carlisle. After about a month, Dwight has to go to the hospital. Boom. Here comes Joe, 19, working now, assisting after 3 months, not even 3 months. I'm doing Josh Metter, and I'm drawing the id. Now, I'm not flipping a little page. I'm flipping a Panavision page, where that kind of thing. Flipping this big thing, you know. In fact, I have some of the original drawings. Greg Nicotero had some. He gave me a couple. So I have the originals. So
For
Forbidden Planet, yeah. These are collector things. So anyway, so there I am, 19, time to go back to school. Why should I go back to school? I'm working for Josh Metter. I go to night school and I study effects at SC and stuff. Anyway, so that's how it started.
Isn't it interesting that you took one opportunity, became work, begot work, and you just, and it's also being at the right place at the right time, but being there, making the effort. And
it was luck. Now, I could tell you about a lot of bad luck in the business, but we'll start with the good luck.
okay.
Another thing that's sort of unusual is I'm working on Sleeping Beauty.
Right.
And I'm doing effects, and one of the little fairies is holding a cookie. And I'm drawing the cookie, and this guy reaches over and says, no, the cookie should look like this. And I go, oh, okay, thank you, Walt. And that was Walt Disney. And he would walk around and correct things. And I had a couple opportunities where the animator would say, take this up to the director and check it out. And I would take it up to the director, and Walt said, let me have that. No, this is the way it should be. So he was a guy, you walk down the hall, hi Walt, I had to call him Walt. Very interesting guy. It was a close relationship with the people, but by the same token, I felt after a couple of years, I really wanted to get into live action, and I felt sort of closed in at Disney. People had been there for years and held down.
Right.
And Walt wasn't big on unions.
Right.
And Walt also, as nice a guy was, he pretty much took credit. Everything was Walt Disney.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
There's Ward Kimball, and I worked with guys that came out, but not many.
And even let's not forget Roy, his brother,
Yeah,
who got all the money.
Yeah.
He had to constantly.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was, but anyway, I felt this, after a couple of years, I really wanted to get into live action because, and so I left there and I went to work at a little theater called the Hollywood Playhouse and started doing sets there and built a portfolio for that kind of thing.
And how did you, what came next? Was it like Torn Curtain or television?
Oh, no. So what happened is one of the guys that ran the theater, he knew an art director, and he admired the sets that I did, and I got some good comments, reviews in the LA Times on my sets.
Beautiful.
We did The Big Knife and some well-known plays at the time.
Were you, I'm sorry to interrupt, were you influenced by other either production designer or other artists while you were doing your work, or is it just,
I could give you a quick story.
Okay.
Because I have another book we're working on, and with my writer that did this and all the movies, and he opens the book up with a picture of American in Paris, and I said, why are you doing this? He said, well, you remember you told me the story about when you were 14, you and Shirley, the girl that lived down the street, where you go down to the little theater in Hayward, a small theater, and you watched American in Paris. And you came back singing American in Paris. And then you realized they didn't make it in Paris.
Right.
They made it all on the back lot.
Right.
And who did that? Production did. Cedric Gibbons did that. And you start thinking, my gosh, these things are made.
So right.
So from that point, I started thinking about, I want to do something like that.
Right.
And so that's how I figured, well, working in the theater, doing sets, maybe I could get a job.
Creating an environment.
Yeah.
Creating that world that you thought was real.
Well, so in those days, I'll just give you a quick background on the studio system. There was MGM, Paramount, Fox, Warner Brothers,
Universal.
And so I talked to the guy at the union, and he said, you start off as either a set designer or an illustrator. And as a set designer, you do drafting. And illustrator, you do storyboards and illustrations. So I had a portfolio, and you start off as a junior. So you're the last to be hired and the first to be fired.
Right.
So I got this job at a little studio called Ziv. And the guy, Bob Kenosha, was the head of that department. And he, incidentally, had designed Robbie the Robot. So it's a crazy world, you know.
Right.
So Bob and I became good friends, and I didn't know what I was doing too much, you know. He said, here, I want you to design this set. And I drew a picture. He says, no. You're a set designer. You're not an illustrator. Right. You got to draft it. So I called my cousin, who's the architect. I said, Al, what do I do? He says, get the graphic center so he'll show you the details. I'm telling you, you know, I was winging it.
Right, that's okay.
So anyway, I got through that, worked with Bob. That was my first job as a junior set designer. Then you go on the waiting list. Then I got a call to go to Fox. And they were doing From the Terrace and Story of Ruth. And that was great. And I worked in this drafting room with all these old timers. Yeah. And the guys that had worked on 10 Commandments and the Silent. Right. But I had a certain quality that I'm also an artist, so if there's something special they needed, a big floral design, you know.
You were useful.
I could do a lot of different things, but I was still a junior.
Right.
So I did that for a while, and then, okay, you're off. You get a call from Fox. No, I left Fox. I went to Warner Brothers. They were working on Ocean's 11, Frank Sinatra, and
Sammy Davis. Peter Lawford.
Oh, yeah. And My Fair Lady.
Oh, okay.
God, I saw, you know, what's her name? Katharine Hepburn.
Kate Hepburn?
Yeah, she was.
No,
Audrey Hepburn.
Audrey Hepburn. Rex
Hepburn.
Harrison.
Yeah. And Rex Harrison. And, gosh, she was so pretty, you know.
Yeah.
We sneak around and watch her. You know. And so, you know, you're drawing. Anyway, so I did a little bit of My Fair Lady, whatever details they needed. So that was cool. I did a thing, I got a call to do an animation thing at Paramount on, what was it? It was a Hitchcock show where they had these flowers that spin down. It was...
was it Spellbound?
Spellbound. No, not Spellbound. It was... the one with Jimmy Stewart.
Vertigo?
Vertigo. And he had Vertigo.
Right.
So I was animating that.
You were doing that.
Yeah.
Because wasn't some of that like Salvador Dali?
Well, I don't know. Dali was working at Disney when I was there, but I never met him. Anyway, it was not a big thing. I was just doing a little part of it. But I got to sneak on the set and watch Cesar B. DeMille direct something, you know. God,
wow.
Because you sneak around, they let you.
Right.
And then I ended up at Paramount, MGM, and they were doing a thing called Mutiny of the Bounty.
Right.
So I was
that was the version with Clark Gable?
No, Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando. Right.
60s or so. Okay. So I was doing pieces of the boat and things like that. You know, and you sneak around. You never saw anybody because you're off in your department. So finally, I become a junior, and then I go to, I met this guy at a party, and he worked at Universal. It was at a wedding, actually, and he said, "Oh, maybe you come to Universal, you know, I think you'd be good there." So I went to Universal, and now I became a senior set designer. And that was pretty cool, and they were doing Mad World. And I remember the assistant art director.
A cast of the greatest comedians of all time, right?
Incredible. Gordon. So I was a set designer, and I drew this, you know, the architectural drawings to build the sets. Stanley Kramer was the director. Rudy Sternad was the production designer. It's amazing I remembered these names so long ago. But let me tell you, Stephen, so they said, we have a scene where this gas station falls apart.
Right.
You guys remember that?
Yes, I remember.
So we were set designer model makers. So we made models not to photograph, but to illustrate. I made a lot of models on the movies later because it's easy to look at the model, quarter-inch scale model, and say, yeah, I could put the camera here, I could do this, you know.
Like a maquette.
It's a very good way to illustrate, you know, plan your shots. So I did this this gas station, and I had little strings, Mama filled lines here. So you pull this string and this wall falls, you pull in that wall falls, and then there was a big water tower, you pull this one, the whole tower, and then you set it back up. So, that looks great. So I take it to Stanley's office, someplace, and John Cassavetes, a young director.
Right, from
this
New York.
era, yeah. What's that here? I said, yeah, look at it. Oh, she says, that's great. So he starts playing with it, you know. He thought that was the coolest thing. That was my great achievement. So what happens is they ship it to Palm Springs where he's shooting, and they put it in his suite. The cleaning ladies come in and say, oh, that's a toy. We got to get that out of here.
Oh, no.
And they threw it away.
You're kidding
No.
me. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my work. And then, you know, we had another thing where a guy had to fly through a big sign.
Yep.
That was scary because we had to make the sign, and I had to go measure the airplane and make the sign, and it had to be steel, but this all had to be weak so he could fly through it. And he just cleared it, you know. That was incredible. That went on for months, that movie.
That was like that was, so many people, that's their favorite film of all time.
It was really interesting, and
it was a who's who of comedians.
The thing at Universal then, Review, MCA, Lou Wasserman, they had a little studio down the street from and they bought Universal.
Now, Lou Wasserman had been an agent.
Well, that was the agency.
Right. So he had represented people like, I think, Jimmy Stewart, and I think he gave him a big deal. And then, so he now became the powerhouse at Universal.
He's the powerhouse. And then eventually they had to take that power away. You're either going to make movies, you can't make both.
Right.
So MCA became filmmaking.
Right.
But what was a good thing for the young set designers to graduate to assistant art director is that the young TV art directors would come in and grab a set designer to go out and find stock units and put things together. The old guys are not doing television, but it gave you an opportunity to work on television and maybe get promoted.
Right.
But in between, I had I'll get off the line here. There was the art department here, and then there was Alex Galitzin, who was head of art department. Now, in those days, the department heads got credit for everything.
Okay.
They may not have done anything on it, but they started off head of the art department, Alex Galitzin, and then same thing with camera, editing, all those departments, all department, they would tell you what you were going to do.
And also in those days, credits weren't as lengthy as they are now. People weren't getting credit. You were uncredited for a lot of the work you were doing.
I didn't get credit in Toward Curtain. I was assistant art director. I worked with Woodstock. Only the art director got credit, or the head of the department.
Right. And so people had to fight. Not everybody realizes that people had to fight for their right to get credit for the work they had done. I'm very aware of that, you know, being in the Writers Guild. But that was those were battles. Those were battles.
In the 60s, nobody got credit, but just key department heads. And then later in the 70s, it opened up. Just briefly, though, the art department, set designers were here. This guy walks in the wrong door. He's supposed to go and see the head of the art department. He walks in the door, the draft room, and he yells out, "Does anybody know where the Lotus car is?" And I said, "What, a Lotus 7, Lotus 20, Lotus what?" He said, "You know cars?" I said, "Well, yeah."
Hell yeah.
I race cars. I was racing a Lotus 20 at the time.
Oh, wow.
I raced Formula cars.
Oh, wow.
That's another story I'll tell you about. Anyway, he said, "Could you come to my office?" So anyway, they were doing a closed circuit telecast of Indianapolis, big broadcast. in 64, and they wanted illustrations. And so I said, oh yeah, it's an interesting year because you have the first of the rear engine cars and Jimmy Clark and the front engine cars with Alves. And anyway, so I explained how we do a storyboard. Anyway, bottom line, my head of my department calls me in and says, well, no, this guy wants you to do this big show, but you have the wrong union card. You got to be a cartoonist to do that. So I have one of those too.
Oh, really?
Anyway, bottom line, I did that in 64. In 65, they wanted me to do it again, and I said, not unless you make me an art director. And so that's how I became an art director, or assistant art director.
Yeah, excellent.
And,
Tell me about working with Hitchcock on Torn Curtain.
Well, so now I'm working with Hitchcock. I'm working for Frank Vertigo, who's really, really good art director. And Hein Herkroff is a German production designer that Hitchcock brought on to do the ballet sequence. Hein had won the Academy Award for Red Shoes. And so I'm working for these two guys, and now I'm an assistant, and I'm giving work to the illustrators and set designers. And Hitchcock was an art director.
Right.
And he really, his joy was to design the movie and the shots.
To pre-visualize it. Right.
Pre-visualize it. And so when it came time to shooting, it was routine for him. So every morning we would meet for coffee. We had to wear ties, sport coat. He wore a black suit.
Right, black tie, white.
All
right.
the time. And we would have coffee, and we'd be the art director, production manager. We'd sit around our coffee, and he would tell very bad jokes.
Was his wife there as well? Edith? Is it
Sometime, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and Susie was his secretary.
Hello, Joseph.
Pardon?
What do you say? Hello, Joseph.
He was telling us jokes, and then we have to see when we're supposed to laugh, And we were shooting a scene in the fjords. It was so cold, he said. And he says, and we're in the fjords, and it's so cold that Mr. Newman has to eat his asparagus with gloves on, because everybody knows you eat asparagus with your hands, okay? And we're waiting for the joke, and that's the joke, is that he's eating with his gloves. And anyway, Susie calls me up and she says, Mr. Hitchcock wants to talk to you. I said, well, where's Frank? No, Frank's on location. Well, how about Hein? No, he's off the note. Mr. Hitchcock wants to talk to you. Okay, so, he calls me in his office and he goes, okay. He says, Joe, and he has a pencil and he's drawing, but it never leaves the paper. It just like, worm crawling around the thing, and he's drawing me a picture. And he says, Mr. Newman, I can't imitate his voice, you probably
Mr.
can.
Newman.
Comes down here and goes down the stairs, and he draws this, and you build this, and Mr. Whitlock, Al Whitlock, who's
Albert Whitlock?
yeah, Albert Whitlock, who did all the
Drawing the paintings.
the paintings,
Yeah.
backdrop things.
Right.
And he will do this, and you build this, and then he comes up, and I would say, okay, Mr. Hitchcock, you didn't call him Hitch, other people, yeah.
Right. Call me Mr. Hitchcock, Joseph.
Yeah, I said, but what about the reverse shot? He says, no, Mr. Newman comes down here, goes here, and I said, you don't.
No coverage. No coverage.
We just shoot. So I wish I had that piece of paper because he gave it to me, and that's pretty much it.
He knew what he wanted.
Knew what he wanted, and so that was my experience with Mr. Hitchcock. If you, Peggy was his, because I remember I saw a movie about Hitchcock, and I saw his secretary, and I thought, what's her name? And then just before they called Peggy, I remembered Peggy.
That's good.
It's hard to, anyway, it was an experience.
It was an experience. And then you ended up ultimately working on a lot of TV, including the Night Gallery.
That was an experience in my life.
Did you get to meet Rod Serling?
Oh, God, yes. I was sitting there with Rod Serling and Jeannot Schwark, who's a camera.
Who ended up doing Jaws 2?
I got him the job.
Okay.
And we were all about the same size. Sitting there. No, I just had a reunion of Night Gallery 3 or 4 months ago with Jeannot and John Badham and the makeup guy and the guy that wrote the book on Night Gallery, Ken Watson, I think his name is. Anyway, but
Rod Serling.
Rod Serling, he wasn't as active as it was on the first one. He didn't want to get that active, so he gave some of the rights away a little bit to the.
I think he was frustrated. From what I've heard, there was a lot that he felt that there was a lot of censoring going around.
Yeah.
I think he felt a little frustrated.
I think so. So he pretty much just wanted to do the writing, and that was it. But we had so many sets, and we would have 2 or 3 directors sometimes
Per episode.
and we would. It was interesting because the producer would give me a stack of scripts and say, "Okay, Joe, see how many times we could use the same set, revamped, go through all the scripts. That way we could schedule it that way. Like Sins of the Fathers, we did a big, and he would give me these ideas. How do you want to do Sins of the Fathers? Do you have any idea? I said, well, let's do it in black and white. Not in black and white, photograph it, but the sets and the costumes, black and white, because the dead guy that they were would have fruit around him, colorful fruit. And if you were the sin eater, you ate the fruit off the dead guy and it consumed his. Jack Laird was a producer. So Jack would give me these sort of freedoms to do this stuff. Another time, he said one with Susan Strasberg. I had all these people, Susan Strasberg. We had, and he said, "What do you see? How do you see this one?" And I said, "How about if we do it just in limbo?" And they're driving in a car and they come up to a bar. And so we did it in limbo, and we put road signs on the little dollies and moved the car and moved the signs past,
Yeah.
And then, so it was sort of abstract.
So you're also looking, so you get into experiment, and then also you had to think of ways to, this is the money we have to spend.
Yes.
How are we going to be judicious in our spending, and how can we be creative?
Well, that's the thing is that we had a scene with a big staircase. Vincent Price comes down that staircase. And then we have another show that has another staircase. I can make it look a little different, but we could shoot it in sequence and save money. It was incredible. I mean, Edward G. Robinson was in that show. We had
Joan Crawford.
It was just.
Well, that's a good segue. So Steven Spielberg directed Joan Crawford in the pilot for that Eyes.
Yeah.
Is that where you met Steven Spielberg?
No, I met him. He did one of the night galleries.
Right.
But before that, let's see. Before he did the pilot, then there was The Psychiatrist.
Right. TV show.
TV
He
show.
did Marcus Welby, Psychiatrist.
Yeah, we did 2 psychiatrists. They only did 6.
Yeah.
And then they canceled it. Jeff Corey did one. But that's when I got to know Steven a little bit.
Yeah.
And Steven's basic problem, he knew how to make movies, but he didn't know the procedure.
The studio system procedure?
Well, no, for an example, he was doing a scene out in the back lot with a lot of extras and stuff, and the actors are here, and he started giving the extras lines. And they're going, oh, God, no. You just raised their rate from,
right.
4 times by giving them a line. And when we were scouting Sugarland Express, I'll tell you about that, we were out, and I was with Bill Gilmore, who was the production manager, and he would figure out the cost factor, and I would say, can we stop here? And I said, you know, Stephen, if we shot down here and we put the line of cars here and Goldie comes down here, you can get a, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Then he got back and he said, you know, I feel like I'm stealing from you guys. And I said, no, I said, that's my job. It's Bill's job to tell you we're too far away, it's going to take too long, it's going to cost too much money, we could shoot closer. My job to give you these
Creative
things, and you could reject it or use it or elaborate.
You have
on
options.
It. You have options. And so he understood that. Speaking of options, going back to Night Gallery, I had a lot of different directors, and you know, Schwark was one that having the scripts early and being able to plan these things didn't give the directors too many options.
Right.
So they pretty much have to bring them in right to left, sit down here, do that. And I found them okay. Junot, I found, was a little bit more creative. He could do it like I laid it out and then improve it a little bit. So when they were looking for a director, after they fired the first director on Jaws 2, I suggested him. And we worked quite well together. But basically summing it up with Rod, I just have to add this, because it was one of the greatest compliments I've had. Sitting there was Junot, and Lawrence Harvey did The Earwig. It was a show about the crawls thing goes in the ear, and we had to do a Borneo set. It was pretty nice. It was a jungle thing, and we're sitting there, and after he had his wine that he was making, we were drinking his wine, and it was like one of the few television things he did. And I said, you know, it's really an honor to work with you, Rod. I mean, you're so great. You wrote all these things. And he turned, he says, well, you know, Joe, really the thanks goes to you. I just write it. You have to make them. You know? And it was like, that was such a...
He trusted
that he could turn around and say thank you.
Right, but that
because very few people do that.
He also was basically saying, "I trusted this story, and put it in your hands,
and
this
the
baby,
visual.
And you made it great."
So that was, that was a great. I did a couple seasons of that.
Wow.
But there was an interesting thing in doing television there. Richard Boone did a thing called Heck Ramsey.
Yeah.
It was a television western, and
you
so it was
were really getting your chops. I mean, you're really developing your skills doing the television.
Interesting, yes, because they were doing a lot of television movies at the time.
Right.
Which sort of after Sugarland.
Yeah, let's jump into Sugarland Express. How did that opportunity come about? That was produced by Dick Zanuck and David Brown. They had just come from 20th Century Fox. Dick had been the president, and then he got fired by his own father.
Yeah, after a short time.
Yep, and then they hired Steven Spielberg to direct. He had come up with the story based on like a National Enquirer.
Exactly, and I mean, I think he had with somebody else.
I think
Matt
Robbins.
Matt Robbins.
Yeah, and it was starred Goldie Hawn and
Sweetest lady you ever want to meet.
Yep.
I can't remember the two guys.
I can't either off the top of my head. Bill Atherton.
Bill Atherton, yeah.
And I don't remember the other. Bill Atherton also was one of the bad guys in Die Hard. He was the newscaster.
And who was the sheriff? The sheriff was pretty well known.
I don't recall who. But so what was that experience like? Sugarland Express. Steven Spielberg. He had just done Duel.
He had just done Duel. I didn't. Duel was a big success for him, but he hadn't done a feature.
Right.
So it was a little different. They were looking for an art director. At the time, I think he wanted somebody from outside, you know, and Bill Gilmore, who I was working for, he said, you know, what we need is a young Frank Arrigo. Now, Frank Arrigo was a guy that I assisted, and they suggested Joe Alves, and so they went to Steve, and he says, oh, yeah, I know Joe. Joe would be fine. And they were thinking, well, there's not many sets, you know,
right.
But Bill said, no, we need an art director out there. And so I took a painter and a carpenter. two guys that also did, and we went on location. The interesting thing was, Dick Zanuck, who was high level, president, head, and producer, and he did a lot of executive stuff on when they were doing the thing with Paul Newman.
He did.
And the Sting.
The Sting, Butch Cassidy and Sonny and his kid.
But he was not like on the line.
Right.
But on this one, he actually got in the car with Bill and Stephen and myself, and we drove for hundreds of miles, Texas. Scouting Texas is incredible. It's not like scouting here. I mean, you drive for miles, if you go from Houston to Dallas or Sugar Land, San Antonio, it became pretty much our base. So got to know him pretty well, and so it was a close group. And there were things that I did. I think that Stephen, what was surprised that I had to make some kind of chicken suit for this character, and so we did a little work on that. But finding the locations, it was a lot. It was a road picture,
right?
So we needed to not make it monotonous. Find long highways. I did a thing on a scout with a helicopter. I could find a road that went for ever this way and ever that way, and then I put a million signs up here, just to get an interesting look.
Right. Didn't that also, the fact you were working on Sugarland, and I know that Dick Zanuck and David Brown bought the rights to Jaws, and didn't Dick say that you should start doing some illustrations?
Here's what happened on that. Helen Gurley Brown.
Cosmopolitan.
She was a Cosmopolitan editor. And so...
married to David Brown.
David had been Cosmopolitan years before.
Right.
They were married.
Yep.
Nice people. She had got somehow the galleys of
Peter Benchley's Jaws.
Peter Benchley's Jaws, and referred to David, said, this might make a good movie, I think he had some designer in mind, a guy I did a show with, I'll remember his name pretty soon, who had drawn a lot of fish and stuff. And Dick said, well, why don't we let Joe do it? Keep it in the family kind of thing, keep it at Universal, where they didn't have a charge number. And at the studios, you needed a charge number for anything, everything. So I was working on television movies of the week. Double Indemnity, it was a movie. It was mostly location. So I'd check out the locations in the morning, so they were shooting there. I'd come back to the studio, my office. And David Brown called me. It's in the book, I think. And said, Joe, we've got this shark movie. We're trying to sell it to the studio. And I wonder if you could go through the galleys and then pick out some situations that you could illustrate. David was the literary guy.
Right.
Very, very nice man.
Right.
They were quite contrary. Dick was, David was the calm.
Right. Dick was feisty.
Yeah. Maybe you could come up with some, So I said, all right. So just do it in between when you have time. So you're basically for nothing. So he sent me the galley sheets, and I start going through, and hadn't really had time to research sharks or stuff. I didn't know about harpoon guns. I thought it looked like Moby Dick, throwing the harpoons. But basically, I tried to illustrate the key factors, about 3 dozen storyboards. Not storyboards, I did illustrations. In charcoal.
Right.
On sort of sketch paper, translucent. Right. You could make prints off of it real easy. So I picked up, the girl getting it, the little boy getting it, and I exaggerated that, the fisherman getting it.
The cage.
The cage. Hooper getting in the cage. Later, he doesn't get it in the cage. I'll tell you why that happened. So I did these, and at the time, I would go over and talk to Stephen. And they had some other director in mind. some guy they
Right.
were interviewing. I can't remember his name.
I don't know either, but he kept calling the shark the whale.
And he said, no, this isn't the right guy. And I said, you know, Stephen, I think this would be a great movie. He wanted to do a pirate movie. Eventually did, but I mean, he wanted to do a pirate movie. But I would talk, I said, what do you think about this and that? So we would talk. Anyway, at October 3rd, I kept everything. I had a little note from Mary, who was the secretary in the front desk, would say, oh, you have a meeting on Monday at 10 o'clock in Marshall Green's office, who had a production per Jaws. Why I kept that slip of paper, I don't know, but my writer on this book is crazy about that because the people love to have original stuff.
Right.
And so I'm in Marshall Green's office, October 3rd, 1973, with all the heads of the department, special effects, art department, camera. Stephen had come aboard. I don't know if they locked him in yet, but he was, and Zanuck. And so I started to give my spiel. And the shark does this, and the shark does that, and it bites this. Now, talking to Stephen, we said, if they do this, we had seen Old Man in the Sea. Good movie, but terrible effects. The big marlin, and they did it in a tank with a terrible backdrop. We don't want it to look like Old Man in the Sea.
Fake, it looks fake.
We want a big shark in the ocean, real ocean, full-size big shark.
25.
Yeah, I'll tell you how that came about too. Anyway, so after I finished that, Marshall turns the effects department, and
Who's it? Did you give Roy Arbogast?
no, not yet.
Okay, okay.
No, this is early on.
Yep.
Punky and Arnold Ernest were the head of the
Universal.
Universal production effects department. Punky, I can't remember his name. But anyway, we used to call him Punky. And he said, well, we can't do this. What do you mean you can't do it? Oh, no. He said, this would take a year, 2 years. So no one's ever done this. Besides, we have more important movies. We've got the Hindenburg. And Marshall got really upset. And he said, Jaws could be a bigger movie than the Hindenburg. And people all laughed because Hindenburg was going to.
Right.
Who's going to make this little shark movie anyway? You know.
Right.
So.
And the Hindenburg had come after Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno. This was their big disaster.
Exactly.
Yep.
So everybody left. I'm cleaning up, putting my drawings back, and Marshall calls me back. He said, Joe, can you get the shark made? And I'm thinking, sure. Why not? You know, good opportunity. What the hell, young
Yeah,
guy?
of course we can do it.
Make the shark. I can have a year or so to make it. He says, okay, take it off the lot. And that was unusual because everything was done in-house.
Right.
Take it off the lot, find somebody to make it. And Marshall really wanted, he lived on a boat. He was a sea guy. And he saw the future in this movie.
Right.
He didn't see it like a cheap.
Right. He wanted.
And he was the head of the studio production department. He was the guy you go to. So I could talk to him. And he said, find somebody and make it off the lot. So I went to Disney, and because they had made some whales, and I asked them.
And they also had done the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yeah, but that I could find later. See, what happened was Bob Matty wasn't there then. They said they could make it, but they wouldn't take it off the lot. They wouldn't take it if they could make it in the ocean. I checked with Joe Lombardi, who had done Godfather, and Joe said, I can't do it now, but that would take a year and a half to develop something like that. Okay. Then I was looking for an illustrator to work with me on doing the big shark, or sculptor actually. And he was busy, but he said, you know, there's Bob Matty. He did 20,000, he did the giant squid. And he's sort of semi-retired now. So I met Bob Matty, and he was in his mid-late 60s, I guess. Very enthusiastic. Yeah, we could do it. We could do anything. He says, give me a couple of days. He said, he came back a couple of days later with this wire thing that you pull, and the mouth went like that. And I said, okay. He said, but we need a group of guys. We need a guy who specializes in the skin, special plastics, you know, certain things that don't absorb water, and we need electronic guys.
Pneumatic.
Yeah. So I called them the Magnificent Seven.
Mm-hmm.
So we found Roy Arbogast, who is still a good friend of mine. He was making breakaway bottles. And he said, yeah, there's some new neoprenes, we could do it because we need something that's flexible but that won't crack and blah, blah, blah. And I found Richie Helmer, who did electronics, and the Wood brothers were specialized in chromoly tubing, welding. And we put together a team. And that was probably late October, November. And then I did a model, 4-foot model. In the meantime, I went up to the Steinhardt Museum, Oceanographical Studies in San Francisco, and I met this guy, Leonard Campagno, a young guy who specialized in sharks, discovered a couple. He came and helped me,
Make it perfect.
Make it perfect, or did that 4-foot thing. So I was getting that locked down, getting the team together, talked to Stephen about the size. Leonard had told me that as the sharks get bigger, they get fatter. The perfect shaped white shark was about 12 feet, but we figured we wanted it twice that size. So Steve and I said, about 25 feet. So these executives are now sort of getting interested. And so I had this guy in the set art department draw just line drawings of a 30-foot shark and a 20-foot shark, and we took it down to the parking lot underground, and we put it on the walls. Executives came down. Steve and I were there. The 20, that looks big, was not big. And then, oh yeah, no, the 30 is just too big. Well, how about in between? How about 25? That sounds pretty good. Yeah, I'm glad you guys could help, And
then that's a great line. It's a 20-footer. 25, 3 tons of them.
So we were being very diplomatic. And so then Stephen was involved then, I think, with doing promotion for, maybe it was Dual overseas. So he said, we got to go scout for the locations. So Dick said, well, just send Joe out. So I went off and I met Peter Benchley in New York. And I had a map, and I had a couple things I was looking for. I was looking for a beautiful little New England town. I was looking for a fishing village. And I was also looking for a piece of water that you could go out and see the horizon. But Bob had come up with this idea of 3 different sharks, a right to left, a left to right, that we towed, and one on a platform with a crane arm and a track that you could sink and you could grab and control. And the 2 other ones, you needed the backside that you could get to it, so you couldn't shoot that side. So anyway, I needed a piece of the ocean near the shore, not too far out, that was 25 feet and with a small tide change. Because if it was a big tide, then you'd lose it.
Right.
So I asked Peter, where did you
envision?
He says, any number of places, Sag Harbor, Stonington, blah, 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 Montauk. And I said, okay. So heck, I just got in and I drove. And I was get out and take pictures of the beaches in Long Island. And now it's December 16th. And what's interesting, as we know the date of that, when Matt and Jim were doing their book, Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, right.
I told them that when I hit Martha's Vineyard, O.J. Simpson was running for 200 yards to break the 2,000 record and blah, blah, blah. And Matt found out that, that was December 16th,
Right, right. So you know the date.
So we know exactly. Anyway, after scouting all these places, I landed on Martha's Vineyard, and Edgartown was perfect. And then I went to this little fishing village, Menempsha.
Yeah. Let me ask you, so just saying, I'm going to cut a little further. So you're now in Martha's Vineyard. You're in Edgartown. You guys decided to do the movie there.
Yes.
And I know that you guys spent a lot of money in Edgartown and Martha's Vineyard and all that area. And you had to build like the Jaws, Quint's shack.
Yes.
There were challenges with that, I know.
Well, what was perfect about Menemsha is when I saw it, I said, oh my God, David Lean would have built this whole thing because it's so perfect. And right at here was an empty lot.
Right.
And if I could build Quint's shack tall enough, because he's this powerful fisher, and then we bring them out to go to sea, perfect.
Iconic image.
So I designed the thing, and I was influenced by some of the buildings on the island that had tall structures to it. Well, immediately the locals said, well, that's too tall. That's, I said, well, this is not a real building. It's going to, we'll shoot it and we'll tear it down. And there's various things. And I had to get permission from different selectmen. I had to go to...
like a town hall meeting.
Well, yeah, but then I had to go to Boston and present the model to technical people. There, legal things there, zoning. So, okay, you build it, but we had to put $500,000 that we would tear it down after we shot it and put the lot back with the garbage that was on it.
Wow. What about the Orca? Can we talk about the Orca?
Sure.
The Orca's again, the iconic boat. Quint owns it. They're going, Hooper, Brody, and Quint are going to hunt that shark.
We needed a boat of a certain size, not too big. So it would be like, oh, it's so big, no shark could, and not too small. These guys would be on a rinky-dink thing. So I started scouting around, and I found the Warlock in Boston with Tom Joyner, who was the assistant director at the time. I showed pictures to Steve, and he said, yeah, the size is about right, but it needs more character. And I totally agreed. And he said, we want bigger windows so we could see the ocean all the time. So
And didn't you add the pulpit too?
Oh, I added the pulpit. I added the crow's nest.
Right.
I redid pretty much everything.
Yep.
And gave it that real character look. And I used dark and off red. I didn't want to use red because I wanted to save the red for the blood.
Right.
So that was the boat. But we had to build another one, the Orca II, because as he crunches the stern, we had to make some sterns.
Right.
We had to have a breakaway thing, and then the boat starts going like this, and so, you need to bring it back for the next day at that position.
Right.
So Bob Matty was very clever. He had the same thing on the barge where he had these barrels, and you turn them over, they fill up, and it sinks. So he had it so he could sink part of the boat and not the other part of the boat. But incidentally, the other reason we shot there is I found that piece of water that was 25 feet with a 2-foot tide was in between Oak Bluff and Edgartown, right on the same, so we could stay in the same location.
Yep.
We didn't have to
Right.
travel away. The only problem is I scouted it in the winter and there was nobody there. In the summer, they're all coming from...
All the armadas and everything.
Everybody, yeah, and that became tricky. So Bob was very clever in building the Orca II and the breakaway. And then we broke, I thought one of the favorite scenes was when they had the guys comparing scars.
Yes.
But going back quickly, November, December, they started to put the team together. Started probably late December, early January, making the shark. The book came out in February of 74. The studio said, we got to start making this movie in 2 months. Well, what about the year to make the shark? Well, wait a minute.
What about the script?
No script.
Right.
No shark.
Right.
We got to make this because it's a successful book and we want it for next summer.
Right.
They hired Carl Gottlieb, who had a few weeks to put the script together. Bob was nowhere near having a finished shark. We got it to wiggle, and so we brought it from California to Martha's Vineyard. They were using little boats. They didn't have any big equipment. Nobody was treating this seriously. So Stephen talked him into May 1st instead of April. So we shot, shooting the beach sequence. Cold, you know how cold it is around here? It's going swimming in the ocean in
like
May?
Yeah.
Huh?
I thought it was even later. I thought they ended up filming some of that stuff like in the, it was like winter. Was like,
Well, May, it was pretty cold here. You go swimming out here in May?
I remember too, as a matter of fact, you're wearing that shirt. I remember Dick saying that Stephen was going to quit. And so he had the shirts made up of your drawing.
Yeah,
and Dick put it on because he heard that Stephen was coming into the office to say, I'm quitting. And he had his shirt on. And, how being so enthusiastic, and Stephen didn't quit. Because I think there was a Writers Guild strike going on.
There was a Writers Guild strike going on. I always thought that Dick and David had nothing to do with the shooting schedule, that it was the studio.
Right.
I found out recently that they were also, we got to start shooting, because they were thinking all the money they could make the next summer.
Right.
And pissed me off a little bit, excuse me. But it was unfair to Bob. And then all the thing about the shark never worked, shark didn't work, was so unfair because, so what would happen?
But back in those days too, weren't they trying to keep everything quiet? They were trying to keep it quiet. They didn't want anyone to see the picture. There was very strict rules not to take pictures of the shark.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Oh, I know.
But you're talking about the actual on the production.
Well, yeah, because somebody from Time magazine came in and took a picture of the shark in my storage room where we had it. Yeah, and they were talking to me, and they found out, and they were trying. I didn't tell them where it was, but because it ended up in Time magazine.
Right.
So.
The other thing I wanted to talk about also is, so red. You talked about red. I know that you very much only wanted the red for blood, right? But then the Kittner boys got red shorts on.
Yeah, that's another thing that irritates you. And Steve and I all agree, we don't want red, and then people don't listen sometimes. And so the wardrobe person, and they bring the kid out to shoot. I said, wait a minute, you can't shoot. He's got red shorts. Well, it's too late. I don't have any more shorts. That's it.
Right.
So,
in a weird way, too, he was kind of like a target. You're kind of saying he's the target. What about...
I shot that into that. Yeah,
that was my other question. You were not credited for doing second unit directing.
No.
What sequences did you direct?
Well, basically, Stephen left. He pretty well shot everything. Vernon Fields, who was the editor, and I did some barrel stuff, chasing the barrels helped us a lot.
Oh, I love the barrels.
I painted the barrels yellow.
Yeah.
Because normally they're black.
So that would contrast against the water.
Exactly. Blue, yellow.
Yeah.
And, of course, with the music, you just have a barrel coming.
Dun, 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 dun.
But let me tell you, even a barrel shot wasn't easy because we needed a 2,000-pound weight to sink here. Then we would have the line, and it would come down with a shiv, go down to that. So when we pulled it, and we wanted the barrel to sink, so that took a day to place where you're going to put the barrel.
Wow.
I mean, it was also so. What I shot was just I wanted a backlight shot of the kid, So you just saw basically the float, and sort of a thing jump up. Not like I illustrated.
Right. But you saw that shark coming in and the blood going flying, and so you also did something like the barrel chase sequences.
Yeah, Vern and I did a couple of those, but basically that was it. I didn't. But what happened was, so when we were shooting everything but the shark, Stephen and I started doing the storyboards, and so I ended up doing over 200 storyboards. Well, union-wise, you're supposed to have, if you, production designer, art director could do an occasional drawing.
Right.
If you're going to do a lot, you hire
a storyboard artist.
But they didn't want to spend the money.
Right.
Joe could do it. So I never got credit for doing it, which is good because then I kept them.
In your book, you have this book of Jaws, designing Jaws, and it's got your storyboards, and then also it's great to. I've seen your movie, the storyboards with the sound effects and the music. Yeah. It's so great, and it's so. Talk about pre-visualization. You did an amazing job.
Well, it was interesting because I've designed other movies, and generally there are departments, and I was not an effects guy.
Right.
fact, I got accused by one of the effects guys controlling the mechanism of the shark, and I just wanted to see how it would work. And he said, that's not the union thing.
Keep your hands off, right?
And I had Ron and Valerie Taylor.
Right, who did the real live action from Australia.
Right. And I had Valerie and Ron. There's an interview on Vernon Fields where we were looking at the shark movement on her Kim editing machine. And Valerie was saying, yeah, no, it moves really good, Joe. Maybe you're moving it too much, so it just sort of floats. It doesn't do that because it's a big shark. So basically with the storyboards, I got involved with communicating with Bob Matty. What do you have there that might work? I think we got the left or right, sir. Go back to Stephen. Stephen, I think Bob's got the left or right, sir. We'll go through. Okay, let's shoot these storyboards. That was our schedule. We shoot these storyboards tomorrow. Bob, we're going to prepare that, sir. Okay, tomorrow. Stephen, if it works, shoot it. If not, it's a test.
Right.
And so that was how we did the rest of the movie.
And did you have the feeling that the film was going to get shut down many times? I know that was what was going on, but did you know that as a crew member?
I would sit there in the production office. We had all the storyboards up in blueprinted.
Because I think the audience doesn't even realize it was supposed to be like a 50-day shoot or something like that. It became what?
We were way over schedule, over budget.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was supposed to be.
It was like 4 times that.
Well, it was supposed to be a $4.5 million movie. We thought it was really 6.5. I think it went to 8 or something like that. It didn't go crazy. It made all this money back in a couple of days.
In hindsight, yeah.
But anyway, so Dick was wrestling with the studio, and he would lie with him. Oh yeah, we only have a couple. And he would mark off. Once we got the shot, he'd go there and cross them off. We got this, and so it was his negotiations, and they got a little upset with Stephen because Stephen said, "Look, I'm not going to shoot this thing if there's any boats out there.
Right.
I want a clear view. I don't want, hey, come and save us." No, there's nobody. They're out alone.
Right.
That's why they broke the radio.
And that was really important, right?
When Quint broke the radio, we're here.
We're abandoned.
And
we're isolated.
Yeah.
That was important, the isolation.
Of course.
You were talking about that scene that you said one of your favorites with the when they're showing each other the scars.
So I talked to Stephen about that, and I said, I'd love to see the shark in the cabin to show how big the shark is relative to this whole scene where these guys are sitting around. The shark's going to consume the whole cabin. He said, that would be great. What do we do? I said, well, I'll make some balsa wood cabins, And I did. I made 3. It's a good thing I made 3 because first take, and finally I said, Stephen, you got the shark in. Maybe you could get that and cut it. And yeah, because I got to cut anyway. So we got it on the last take with balsa, because we were in Martha's Vineyard. We didn't have access to balsa wood and breakaway glass and all that stuff. We had to limit everything.
Right.
And the crew was getting nutty.
Stir crazy, right? Island, what do they call it? Island fever. Right.
And every time the shark would work, it would make noise. And they'd laugh after we cut, and then I'm thinking, boy, they're going to laugh at this movie. We get back home, they're going to show it, and the shark's going to come out, and they're going to laugh. So we got home, and I shot that last sequence, but we had stuff to do. We had on the back lot the lake where they come out at night and they're looking for Ben Gardner.
Yeah.
And we had the underwater sequence.
Vernon Fields swimming pool, right, where his head pops out.
I'll tell you about that.
Oh, and then you also did the cage at the MGM.
At the MGM. And we did the cage, and what happened was Dick always felt he wanted to get real sharks. I was a little concerned about that. I talked to Ron and Valerie Taylor, and they said the biggest shark we could get is 16 feet. I says, okay. So I made a small cage, and I got a small guy who said, oh, yeah, I could do all this stuff. And I made small tanks. And we set the guy down there and put him over. And here comes this 16-foot white shark, and he freaks out, sucks all the air out immediately.
Because you don't really, even though it's a small canister, it's like what, a minute of.
Well, and he was frantic. He was not a
Right.
skin
He was like,
scuba.
yeah, right.
No, he did other things. They take him out. The cage is hanging over another cage, full-size cage, sort of a breakaway one, and soft metal. I made his out of chromoly tubing, so it was safe. The shark gets in there and starts shaking things around, and we saw the footage. It was fantastic.
Phenomenal. And it's in the film.
How are we going to do this? Hooper's supposed to get killed. Maybe Hooper gets away. So Carl really made the script more linear.
Carl Gottlieb
Did a great job. I mean, we talk quite often on these different occasions, and we talk about our experience. That he had a couple of weeks, and he took away the love affair with the police chief's wife, mafia. Just made it much more linear.
Yeah.
3 guys out there with different interests and a big shark, and so Hooper gets away, and so we shot all that at the MGM tank, and we had our shark. So Stephen came to me, and it was a wrap. We were finished. He said, "Joe, I think I could get another scream. There's a couple more shots. I need a shot of when they go, show me the way to go home, boom, boom, and the shark hits the boat. I'd love to have the shark hitting the boat." So I said, okay. So I had a young guy a local guy that was working with special effects. He was at my house back in California, Woodland Hills, helping me rebuild my house. I said, Kevin, we got to build a piece of a boat. So my garage, we built a hull of a boat. And Stephen came over, we shot in the driveway. We hammered that with a hose, and we shot with a water hose in my driveway. Show me where, and the water was breaking the thing. And then we needed the head
of Gardner.
So we built another little hull in my garage, took it to Verner's pool. Somebody stole the head out of the makeup. Somebody borrowed the camera, and we shot all this.
And I heard like you had to put milk in the water, right?
And, yeah, we clouded up Verner's pool, and Zanuka Brown didn't know we were doing this. So then there were dailies for Jaws. It can't be dailies. Can't be. The movie's over. It was already cut.
Right.
So Stephen was sticking his neck out to here. He put those in. Okay. Then comes John Williams.
Yeah.
And I saw the first screening was a second screening because Stephen added these next 2 shots for the second screening. It was in Long Beach somewhere. And I think, they're going to laugh. Well,
they jumped.
They didn't laugh. They screamed. The executives, Lou Wasserman and got together. They're going to it's going to be a big summer release. 450 theaters. Now they have 4,000.
Right.
450 was huge.
Right. I remember, yep. Lines. It was very important to have people standing outside, standing in line. That was part of the selling tool.
I was on vacation up doing rafting up in the Sequoia somewhere, and I came down this little town. I saw this big line with a girlfriend at the time who was Patches, the little girl that was
right.
Yeah, well, that's a long story, but that's personal. Anyway, we went together for a number of years. We're still good friends. Anyway, what the heck is that line? We drive around, and then there's Jaws.
Isn't that unbelievable?
I said, what happened? They're watching this movie,
Yep. What about let's talk about Close Encounters.
After Jaws, I'll give you a quick rundown. Stephen took a break, and I said, why don't we go skiing? So a good friend of mine, Dick Smothers had a cabin up in Mount Mammoth. So we went up there, and he says, I want to talk about this movie I'm going to direct, Bingo Long and his Traveling All-Stars.
All right.
So I got a bunch of old Life magazines. It was about
baseball.
Black baseball teams in the 30s.
Right.
So I got all this stuff, and we got stuck in the snow. We were trapped in there. It was snowing. And he said, there's this book, UFO Scientific Inquiry. Alan Hynek's book.
Right.
It had 3 chapters: Close Encounters of the First Kind, Second Kind, Third Kind.
Dr. Hynek, right? And he was, I think, at one time he was
was
a debunker. I think he was someone who was anti, who became.
Because in his book he has things of thousands of people have seen various UFOs, and he was in the movie. Very
Right.
nice guy. So he starts talking about this Watch the Sky script that he's got roughed out, and I said, "Boy, that sounds pretty interesting. A little bit more interesting than this baseball movie." He says, "Yeah, but I don't have a deal. I don't have anything." Okay, so we go back home. About 2 weeks later, I get a call. I was out of work. I wasn't working at the time. I get a call from John Badham, who I worked with. He says, "Joe, I'm doing this movie called Bingo Long."
Now, by the way, John Badham ended up doing Saturday Night Fever, as an example.
Very well.
And War Games, etc.
Yeah, great.
Blue Thunder.
Really nice guy. I
Yeah.
told you, I just saw him again a couple months ago. And we did a lot of night galleries. We did a number of movies, television movies together.
So he calls you, he says, "I'm doing this Bingo Long movie."
And I said, well, I guess Steven's not doing it. So I do this thing called the Embryo instead with Rock Hudson. Didn't work out, but I got to hire Roy Arbogast. He worked on the Embryo and stuff. So and then I get a call from Steven after that, and he says, "Yeah, I got this thing, Watch the Sky." And then John Veach, who's the head of, it was going to be a Columbia picture.
Right.
He calls me in his office. He says, "There's this movie, and I think they're going to call it Close Encounters, and it's a low-budget movie, and we're going to do everything on the lot, except we need a very strange-looking mountain." So Stephen was doing something else, and they didn't have anybody on it. They said, "We want you to go scout this." So here I go by myself, no location guy, and I'm looking at it, and I got all these maps, and I go, Verna Field had an office. She became a vice president. We'd go and hang out. She had 2 offices. Hang out. I'm there looking at all these maps, and Carl Gottlieb walks in, and he says, "What are you doing?" I says, "I'm trying to find these unusual looking. There's Shiprock and Chimney Rock, and he said,
Little
yeah, there's
monuments."
Devil's Tower." He said, "Yeah, Devil's Tower is pretty interesting, and Canyonland, all these places, Scenic USA." So I take off to South Dakota, and I look at Mount Rushmore. I figured the back might have some interesting rocks. Yeah, it didn't work. And I drive to Nevada. It was Chimney Rock. I went to Bryce, and then I got Devil's Tower. And I see this little thing, and I'm driving, and then it disappears. And then you get to, oh my gosh.
Da-na-na-na-na-na-na.
And let me tell you, it really changed the mood for a couple of reasons. It was almost spiritual.
Right.
And I found out later it is spiritual because there's a Native American group that puts little cloths, and you can't climb it at certain times of the year. So what developed from that, this picture got bigger and bigger.
You know what it reminds me of? I'm sorry to interrupt. It just
No.
hit me just now. The power of it. It just came to my head. 2001. That
The
obelisk.
obelisk. Yeah.
That's what it kind of reminds me of.
It
And
had
that mystery.
power, yeah.
Yes.
And so I was talking to Steve, and so I said, because the script said there's this weird mountain, and then there's an encampment, military encampment, that they're all going to go there to see this thing. And I felt, I think we should build an arena, something really, this is an important event. And Stephen went along and said, yeah, okay, so there again, I make a model.
You're collaborating on this.
Yeah, but I felt,
Right.
we needed to make it
Big.
bigger. And so John Veach took me to stage 15, 16, Warner Brothers, because that's where Columbia was based at the time. He says, this is where they shot Camelot.
Right.
2 stages combined, biggest, other than stage 30, at MGM was the biggest
Yep.
stage. He says, that's where you could put your big set. And he said, what's the matter? I says, I think it's too small. And he says, you guys, you make this movie Jaws, and now you think you can do anything, which I think we thought a little bit. It gave us
That's
more
okay.
confidence.
Yep.
I said, no, that's okay. So I made a model, I have a crew now. Hired some guys, and we started making this clay model of that size. We measured out, and so the executives were interested because they were having some problems with Beagleman. There was some
David Beagleman and the Czech problem, and Columbia at that time was on the verge of maybe bankruptcy. So
they
this
needed
movie,
a big movie.
Yeah, this movie's either going to save it or kill it. Close Encounters.
Yeah. So we had Julia and Michael Phillips came on, and they came off the Sting.
You're right.
So now we got some Sting, Jaws.
Young, and they were relatively young. And
oh yeah, everybody is young.
Same,
I was 10 years older than Steven, so I was experienced. So
right.
So they said, "What do you think?" I said, "I think it's too small." What do you think? I said, "I think it should be 4 times this." So okay, make another model. So I made a model 4 times that. That's in there. I think you see the. So we had the meeting again. Wow, that looks fantastic. And I had no cars, so I could just a little. So we have the scale. It was big, and all these little cubicles with scientific inquiry, because this big spaceship's going to come down. We want to record it.
Right.
And okay, great. Where are you going to shoot it? Because Doug Trumbull was now involved, and Doug said, "I need an enclosure because I'm going to do front projection, and I need to capture all this stuff. So it's got to be like a stage. Can't be on a field."
We had Doug here at our this exact table.
Did he talk about that?
Yeah, he's a genius too.
Yeah,
like yourself.
incredible guy, and we had a good working relationship. And I told the size, and he realized I was trying to get big, and he was all for that. And he's going to shoot it in 16 millimeter, and we're going big, big, big. And then they're saying, "Where are you going to shoot it?" And I said, "I don't have a clue." And so Clark Palo was the associate producer, production guy, wonderful guy. Clark said, "We'll go out and find it someplace." So I started putting the word out to various film, offices.
Yep.
And some of them said, "Oh yeah, we got it." And I go up there, no, it wasn't big enough, And then I found in Oregon hangars, World War II hangars, Zeppelin hangars and stuff. But they were great. But then they would have a lumber machine in connection. Right. No, can't have the lumber while we're shooting.
And you somehow get to Mobile, Alabama.
Got to Mobile, and they had 2 hangars, and they were 300-foot square, which was fine, but the doors opened all the way, and I figured I could extend that and make it football field square plus another 150 feet. I mean,
this is like 150,000 square feet.
Yeah, it was incredible. And so, all right, that's what we're going to do. And so, but I had to build this, just a black backing, 6 stories high, just all scaffolding, 150 feet this way, 350 feet that way, and I needed black backing. And the studio's him and hawing about this expensive movie, who now has gone from $4 million, so creeping
15,
up.
15, I think.
15, 16. And
biggest, most expensive film in the history of cinema at that time.
Creeping up. Well, what about the one at Fox with Elizabeth Taylor?
Cleopatra?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know that
that was
considered
pretty expensive.
Yeah,
okay.
But I think this was considered at that time.
Well, maybe in this country.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I said, I need black backing. She said, "Well, this is okay. Just go rent it." I said, No. I need a mile of black backing. I need over 5,000 feet of black backing. And I have a company in Texas that will make it, but it'll take 3 months. So I need to get an okay now. So she went to the studio heads and I said, "We're going to greenlight this movie or not? Because Joe's got to make this backing. Or got to make." So they greenlit the movie, and we started making the black backing.
Wow.
And
you built this enormous set, and you also built the other sets too there, right? So like the moment where where everybody's getting together and
the car drives through.
The car drives through. That was all there.
That was there because there was another stage right next. So I built a mountain with a driveway, a road that you could actually drive about 40 miles in and out of the stage.
Yeah.
And that's where we shot the thing where they go off the cliff back in L.A. And what Doug had this front projection screen, which was 125 feet by 30 feet high. It's huge. And he, shot all this.
And you're working also with Vilmos Zsigmond. You also had different cinematographers on that too.
Well, this is sort of a sad story.
Okay.
Vilmos, we worked on Sugarland.
Right.
He was great. We had some problems at first because I was a television guy and he was a movie guy. And Stephen kept saying, yeah, but Joe's done a lot of... And there was a situation on Sugarland where we're shooting in a car lot, Big John's car lot, and there was a movie theater back here. And they were trying to view that. And he says, I can't get it unless I have a big tarp. I said, I'll take it care of it. I'll get it for you. Really? Yeah, I can do that. So after that, we became close friends.
Okay, good.
So then on Close Encounters, we had to work tightly together. Even to build this set, I got the Rose Bowl, where they do the Rose Bowl, and I measured out the set in the Rose Bowl, so he put all the lights on, so then he could take a measurement and then figure out how much additional light he's going to need.
Right.
And he had 48 arcs
Wow.
up there in that, the place where we shot in Mobile. What happened, towards the end, it was getting difficult. And Vilmos had a hard time. It was a hard shoot. And he and Stephen weren't getting along. And so he finished the movie, but when we had some one-day shoot, one day here, Stephen hired 3 really big-name photographers to do one-day shoots, and then got credits.
I got it. Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't want to get into that.
Right.
But I mean, they had John Alonzo.
Right.
Bill Fraker.
Right.
God, I'm remembering all
William
these guys.
Fraker, right.
Yeah, Fraker's a nice guy. I used
Yeah.
to have drinks with him. And Alonzo had done some big movies. And but Vilmos won the Academy Award.
Right. Okay.
He came down with it, and he.
And one last thing, didn't you also guys end up purchasing the house, the Neary home?
Oh, I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
So when we were shooting all this other stuff, Stephen said we could wrap and go shoot the Neary home back in L.A. And
It was supposed to be Ohio, right?
I said, Stephen, I don't think that's going to work. I said, because everybody builds fences in L.A. We all have these communities. And I think this has to be more open. And I don't think it's Ohio. And Clark is such a great guy. Clark said, we'll go to Ohio and see what we could find. So we went to Ohio, looked at stuff, and it was nothing like L.A. I came back, and I found a little community of new houses they were building in Mobile.
Yep.
And they're all open. So, I mean, you're barbecuing here, and you see the guy barbecuing,
right.
hey, Joe, or hey, Bob, blah, blah, blah. They're barbecued. All the backyards ran together. So it was great. Rent a house. I said, well, we can't because people don't own them yet. They're a community. Clark and I said, why don't we buy the house? We'll fix it up, finish it up, and rent it to the studio. So we told the studio that. And they said, of course, first of all, we told them to buy it. Well, no, we're not buying the house. Then we said, well, Clark and I are buying the house.
We'll rent it to you.
We'll rent it to you. You're not buying the house. If you're going to buy the house, we'll buy the house.
Oh, that's funny. And then you had full control.
We had full control. We fixed it up, and it worked out so well because when he was running around throwing stuff into the house,
it was your home.
Everybody could see it.
Right.
See, they're all looking at this weird guy. What's he doing? Had it been in L.A., not, knocking Steven, he just wasn't thinking,
Right.
Directors got to think about a lot of things.
Right.
I learned that when I did Jaws 3D, is you got to focus a lot. You let your departments do that. But he would say to me on Jaws 3, stay away from the art department. You deal with the actors.
You get a full-time job.
Yeah. So you worry about the visuals. And that worked out so good because it was an open area and they could see how crazy this guy was.
Did you, you talked about Jaws 3D and directing. What was your overall feeling about directing? Did you enjoy it? Was it more challenging? Were there surprises for you?
Well, I ended up directing 100 Days of Second Unit on Jaws 2.
Right.
And I brought in the director after they fired the first director. So I was used to directing. I wasn't used to the stars, but that was a bunch of kids.
Right.
And I was directing the kids and the Shark and Keith Gordon, who became a very successful director
Dennis
later.
Quaid too, I think, right? Wasn't Dennis Quaid in that second one? The third one.
He was in the third one.
The one
yeah.
you directed, yeah.
That one I directed. No, my problem on Jaws 3D is Alan, the producer, was a television guy, and he wanted to have a lot of influence.
Oh,
you know,
gotcha, yeah.
And he wanted to do it cheap. He didn't want to build a shark. He wanted to use stock footage. I said, Alan Landsberg, and so I hired this huge guy, Scott Maitland, as my second assistant, who's about 6'5", and I said, when Alan comes on the set, just keep him away.
Oh, right.
No, but that was the kids were good. Leah Thompson was one of my actors were good.
Right.
Lou Gossett.
Right.
It was, but the 3D was difficult. We had to make cameras.
Right. That's the
so
challenge.
that was the difficulty, was the technology, and the forcedness of a television producer trying to
influence something that should have been bigger.
But directing is like anything. I mean, you do your homework and plan your shots.
Yep. Well, Joe, I want to thank you so much for our conversation here. This has been a treat. I am a fan of your work. I love you, what you do, and I appreciate your willingness to educate other filmmakers and film historians, and it's a real treat. And I hope people buy your book too, because I bought it. It's a great book, and everybody who loves film history should try to get a piece of
well, the book, Catalina Island now has the rights to it until September, but they can get it on catalinamuseum.org
right.
if they want it. I'm just doing a little sales
plug.
thing.
Well, Joe, thank you so much.
Take
This
care.
has been an honor.
My pleasure.